It is now 1:45, so I think we can get started with the roundtable. My name is Liza. I will be the moderator for today, and in a moment, I'll introduce the two writers, both undergraduate students, I believe, who will be talking a bit about their work and about their perspectives on speculative fiction from a craft standpoint or from a creative writer's standpoint. So I'll start with Emily, because Emily will be presenting first. Emily Tanu is a first year majoring in creative writing at UCR, whose love for writing manifests in both speculative fiction and poetry. She is Vietnamese American, and her work often explores her cultural background as well as identity, belonging, and self-discovery. Emily hopes to write her first novel soon, and she wants to encourage other young writers to never give up and to keep pursuing their dreams. In addition to her love for writing, Emily also works on personal projects such as scripts and short films, as well as digital art, just as long as there's coffee with some.
Hi, my name is Emily Tayo. So my experience with speculative fiction is through writing my own novel process, which is currently titled The Time Traveling Complex. And to give a basic synopsis, a human experiment named Celia Bishops makes a deal with a time-traveling god named Romeo as a way to repay her debts. And she's sent from the year 2045 to the year 1927 in this faraway past, alternative past, known as the Referee. And there she must track down a group of 6 runaway criminals who she is ordered to befriend and betray for unknown reasons. Other than that, they all share a connection with the now altered timeline. And so I went into crafting this novel by exploring the concept of cause and effect. So cause and effect is relevant when shaping what-if events, like the causes that will lead my characters to reveal themselves in their actions, the effects. And I would say that the speculative fiction archive is like our real-life example of cause and effect, because by studying the ways that speculative fiction reflects like a time's political, economic, and social conditions, we learn how the past shapes creative interpretations of both the present and the future.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Taking notes. Yeah, of course. So I'm thinking we can go next to Jonathan's blurb about his work, and I'll introduce you as well. So Jonathan Martinez is a second generation Hispanic child coming from a loving and supportive home and community. He is always committed to new ideas and thinking unconventionally that challenges the norms. He is currently an undergraduate at California State University and is pursuing a biotechnology degree, but is also pursuing a minor in creative writing as he discovered his passion for writing during the winter of 2022 and wants to create stories that entertain and inspire readers. This has led him to explore many areas within the creative writing world and see other writers' perspectives. So Jonathan, would you like to share your screen, I believe? Yes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan Martinez, and my creative writing work that I've been working on for about 2 years now is called Gastonia, Philosophy Unveiled. So, what is Gastonia? This is a fantasy novel, like I've been saying, I've been developing for about 2 years now, and I've recently started actually getting more into it as I've had more time to focus more on it. It's still a work in progress, and it's not entirely done, but I'm still working out the kinks. I have a passion for fantasy and its elements, as fantasy has always been, I've always been drawn to it within many regards, such as Percy Jackson, Lord of the Rings especially, which are featured in the Eaton collection, and I find them to be very inspirational. And I'll be honest, the name Castonia came to me when I was just daydreaming in the shower, thinking like, what would I name this book? Oh, Castonia sounds fine. So the backstory of Castonia is very complex, and it took me about like a month or so to finally like get it through. So essentially, this takes place in a world called Illoria, and 50 years before the story begins, there was a great conflict that spread across the world of Illoria. The Embergloff Empire had spread its borders and influence across much of the world. This caused mass migration and panic from across many people fleeing the conflict. After 4 years, the Kingdom of Castonia, along with the Zelvin clans, and a few other remaining kingdoms banded together to push back the Embergloff Empire. 3 years later, the empire was brought down, with Gastonia forming a group known as the Ogre-Knights, who are individuals who possess extraordinary abilities and mastered the mystical energy known as Equinox. They were formed in order to bring about peace and justice across the world, in order to prevent a worldwide conflict from happening again. A few years after the war came to an end, another conflict arose that seriously tested the Ogre-Knights and the result. In the end, they managed to subdue this new threat, but the scars still remained. With the passage of time, the Kingdom of Castonia became the sole power in Illoria, and its citizens experienced wealth and prosperity with a new culture based on the mixing of many races and people groups. Throughout all this new peace, there had been dark forces at play in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge and throw the world back into chaos. So this is background for my story. The races of Illoria include humans, who are known for their versatility and ambition. They inhabit various regions and engage in a wide range of professions and pursuits. Zelvins, similar to humans except for their pointed ears, and a culture that entirely dedicated to warfare. They are very isolationist and keep to themselves. Viridians are similar to humans, and they mostly live in the forest. And they are ones who are in tune with nature and dedicate their livelihoods to ensuring nature is preserved. The Nuldae. Nuldae are basically humanoids with wings. They live in the high mountain tops and floating islands hidden within the clouds. Their command of the sky is unmatched. Orcs. They are strong and fierce, but hold honor in the highest regard. They are a tribal society and raid the coasts of many kingdoms while living in mostly tundra biomes. Minotaurs. They are similarly known for their strength and formidable presence, and they can be found within the mountainsides in elaborate labyrinthine settlements. And lastly, goblins. They are cunning and resourceful. Goblins in Illoria are skilled integers and merchants that live in bustling cities and are nomadic traders. One of the main plot points of my book is Mesrin Conservatory, which is a school created after the war to help foster in new Ogre-Knights and learn more about the world of Illoria. It is a hub of research and innovation, as well as a symbol of a new world order after the war. This is the map I created of my world of Illoria. I don't know if you can see. Right here would be the Kingdom of Castonia, along with its neighbors that are spread across the world. And here, I just wanted to make this known that, like, I managed to plan this out incredibly well, and I feel very proud of this. I managed to finish this last night. So the magic in Illoria can be split into 3 sections. First would be Equinox, which is a spiritual energy inherent in all living things. It is a versatile and foundational form of magic that can be refined and harnessed to enhance various physical and mental attributes. The second form would be runes, which is a magical language that, when used in a specific pattern, can perform various magical feats. This form of magic relies on precise arrangement and understanding of ancient symbols. And the third form are celestial stones. These ancient semi-conscious stones fell to Illoria centuries ago and became embedded in the earth, forming caverns. These stones are indestructible except when near the individual, at which point they emit a shimmering noise that can be crushed to transfer their power. My main characters will include Jason Harley, who is the grandson of Ignacio and Esmeralda Harley, who are renowned heroes from the Great War against the Embergloff Empire. His lineage is steeped in heroism and remarkable abilities, creating a legacy that weighs heavily on him. And next I have Ada Fixina, who is a Zelvin girl and the protagonist of my story. She is a transfer student to Mesrin Conservatory and is accompanied by her sister. This makes a rare occurrence as Zelvins seldom leave their homeland. For Jason Harley, he is half Cilician and half Castonian, with dark hair along with green eyes and has a medium skin tone, indicating his Cilician heritage. Ada Fixina herself, she is full Zelman and has the signature pointed ears. She used to have dark eyes, but her eyes transformed into a pink color after getting her divinity art from a celestial stone. She has light blonde hair along with being pale herself. Some additional characters would include Damien Gerza and Sophia Dirtrace, who are best friends with Jason. Franklin Lowe is a lonely blacksmith who wants to become an alchemist. The first in his family. Maria Wood is a Viridian who comes from a forest background. Zaya Knox is a noble who unfortunately is very selfish. Queen Jane Castilla is a major player in this, as she is the leader of the Kingdom of Castonia, but she wants to foster in new alganates. Professors Nancia Mellon and Professors Stephen Stratford are both teach various classes at the Measuring Conservatory, and they both have very drastically different personalities in helping their students. Noemi Harley and Araceli Harley are both sisters of Jason Harley, with Noemi being the twin sister. And Alethea Fixina is Ada Fixina's younger sister. So the themes of some themes in my story include unity and diversity, because due to the diverse backgrounds and abilities of the characters, they underscore strengths found in unity and cooperation. The next would be growth and self-discovery. Each character's journey will be marked by a personal growth and self-discovery. Jason and Ada especially will learn a lot from each other in this changing world. Third would be legacy and responsibility. The great war and the responsibilities it imparts on the new generation are essential themes. They must navigate their inherited duties while forging their own paths. This mashup of characters from different backgrounds creates a dynamic that sets up a compelling narrative in a world filled with magic, history, and evolving societal norms. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan and Emily, for your presentations. Your work seems very riveting. I hope you really do publish your work in the future so we can all read and share in it. So I have prepared some questions for you all that we can progress through in no particular order. If anyone in the audience, as we're discussing these questions, has comments or ideas that are especially pertinent to the conversation, you're welcome to raise your hand, and I'll try to keep an eye out for raised hands. And I think that can go for people in Zoom as well. But we will also have a Q&A at the end if you do want to reserve your questions for that time. So because of the incredible detail of the stories you've both shared, or at least the synopses of the stories you've shared, I think it might be interesting for us to start by talking about world building. So I'm curious about how first you each define world building. And I should also mention, please feel free as roundtable members to respond to each other's answers if you find them interesting. So first, how do you define world building? And what does your world building process look like?
Okay, sure. So world building for me, it's like consisted of reshaping the reality we have to like a certain extreme, because my story is set in like this Paris like city set in the 1920s, and I want to get like the dystopian point across, and so I leaned on like the romantic aspects and like put that to the extreme, so that it can portray it as like the spectacular utopia. So then readers will think, oh, this place isn't bad, you know, I could stay here. But the whole point is that it's the romanticism of that is really hiding what's like hiding secret dark themes beneath. And yeah, I wanted to sway my readers away from what's really going on.
Yeah, and Jonathan, do you have an immediate response?
I would say there's similar things apply to me too for world building, but I also want to, depending on what type of world you're creating, your world is similar as in something that's related to our world, as in you're saying Paris like city. For me, fantasy, I've always found that being able to create a whole new world and being able to describe it as if you were describing something in the real world, I find that to be a crucial part of world building. As for example, I created this map because I wanted to be able to envision everything for me, and whoever reads my book, be able to see what the world would look like and how it works, how the landscape works, how the magic works, how magic affects the society. That for me, that's why I find it right. World building.
Yeah. I think what comes to mind for me listening to you both describe world building is that despite working in genre fiction or working in fantasy genres, we can say, there is still an element of realism that you're identifying in the work you're doing. I think it's been a point of contention, I think for scholars and for readers of speculative fiction, that there is often a hard line or a perceived hard line between like literary fiction or realism in fiction and speculative fiction. And I think you're revealing that that line can be a lot more blurred than people think.
Honestly, kudos to you for making a whole map.
Yeah.
Because for me, I like basing it off of real places to make it easier for myself. Personally, world building is difficult. It's a difficult thing to do, so kudos to you. Because like Paris, you know, most people will they have, you know, people have mixed opinions about Paris. Like some people are like, oh, Paris is such a romantic place, and oh, all like the good things are happening. But at the same time, people are like, oh no, there's like trash everywhere in Paris, and there's like the negatives in that. So I thought that I wanted to kind of view a city from like a romantic side, like a romanticized point of view, and then those are like, oh well, but that romanticized view of it is like shielding what should really be known about the whole nature and culture within that city.
I think that leads me to a follow-up question. Are there particular places, like real world places, that have inspired you in your current works of progress? Have you found yourself doing a lot of research about real world sites and locations?
Yes, for me, I actually have the Kingdom of Silesia. I'm basing it off of Aztec culture, more specifically the Yaqui clan. As I recently discovered that my grandmother is Yaqui, and I wanted to be able to expose more of that culture through this fantasy world where this culture isn't so niche like in the real world. And also some certain places I literally like trying to describe like how to perfectly describe a biome, like a tundra or a jungle. And I'm just trying to make sure that the world I create is able to be as real as it could possibly be in this fictional setting.
I think for me, like other than Paris, but yeah, I've mostly just explored within like how things were in the 1920s. And I think I would read books like The Great Gatsby, you know, and how they describe like Gatsby's parties and how they're extravagant and stuff. Like I really want to build up to that. But I feel like for specific places, I don't exactly have a specific place. But if any come to mind, I would like to see it. To see if there's actually like a utopian looking city out there.
Something that I know that there is in, like, I think Sri Lanka, a city that has like these buildings that have like foliage incorporated into the design. It could be interesting to think about utopian cities from like an architectural point of view.
Yes, I think as someone who goes on Pinterest a lot, there's always like really nice architecture. And then usually I know in some places like I think it's called like Bellagio or something. They have like this certain area and it's like everything looks like it's gold. And I'm just like feel like I'm in an entirely different place. And so I kind of want to capture that aspect, but with like world building, just making you feel like, oh, like this is different from what we see in our reality, but it's like a better version.
Any follow-up comments, either from our panelists or from the audience? So I think I have another follow-up question under this sort of branching question. So the concept of utopia or the theme of utopia, I think we've seen coming up quite a bit throughout this symposium from the scholars or people who were presenting from a scholarly perspective. Do you all find that utopia is a concept you're often tangling with or exploring with or exploring?
Sometimes yes. As for me, I just think a utopia would be something, you know, a perfect society, something like that. But then after I read 1994, I'm like, okay, sometimes you know about that. In my world specifically, I kind of based the Kingdom of Estonia off a kind of utopian society as trying to think of it realistically, if a country were to come out victorious and be the sole superpower in the world, and everybody in that country who lives there would be so wealthy, prosperity, while the whole rest of the world was still rebuilding, I'm pretty sure they would see themselves as like the perfect society, and that would get to them, and that can lead to problems, which I do want to explore later on.
For me, I think with my work, I do explore the idea, like the question of, do we want a utopian future? Because, and also like, would this utopian future be for everybody? Like, would it be a perfect world for everybody? Because my protagonist is Afro-Latina, and I kind of explored the idea that when she's in the reverie, like it's a utopia, but not for her. So it's a utopia for everyone's there. Everyone says that they're happy, but then Celia, the protagonist, asks herself like, "Oh, but is it a place where she is allowed to be happy?" So I like to explore the idea like, is a utopia like a perfect world really perfect world, or is it only a utopia for some people? Like kind of how we're living right now. Some people would say, "Oh, we're living the dream," or the American dream, but not everybody is living that American dream as most people would say.
Thank you. Thank you both for your responses. Okay. So I think my next question for you all, which is maybe a bit related to this theme of utopianism, is more generally speaking, what themes and ideas do you find yourself returning to in your writing? And relatedly, what kind of stories do you aim to tell and why?
For me, some themes I didn't mention in here would be legacy. As Jason Harley himself, he is feeling a lot of pressure since he has to live up to a long legacy of family, especially his parents, because they are renowned across the world. And this, I always find it to be like, how would someone deal with this pressure, especially if they themselves were not given a special gift like the rest of their family? How would they feel? How would they try to make a name for themselves? And another theme I come back to is the clash of cultures. As kind of in the United States, there's always been a clash of cultures here, a melting pot. And that's what I kind of basically came to Gastonia on, as so many people were fleeing this conflict. Everyone wanted to seek refuge here. And in the 50 years that that's happened, there's been tensions between multiple people groups and races as they're trying to all try to live together, but obviously they might have different values and beliefs.
I think for themes that are in my work, time travel is a big thing for me. But the thing about it is that it has like glimpses of the past and of the future. And I feel like a story that deals with both of that, you can really do a lot. Because you can critique the past and discuss its consequences in the future, but it's also like brings up questions like, oh, like what would happen if we altered something from the past? Like, would we want to change the past? And like, would we want a different future? Things like that.
So I have a question that, well, a follow-up question that maybe will specifically relate to Jonathan's work, but I think both of you maybe will have responses or thoughts about it. So you, Jonathan, in your Castonia story are working with fantasy races, or you have fantasy races within your story, like elves and was it orcs as well, and some other fantasy races?
Yes, I do.
Do you find yourself drawing upon like real world understandings of race in your construction of those characters or of those cultures, or do you try to lean away from being overly realist in your interpretation?
Right now, I actually, what I've written so far, I've mostly gone for a more realistic approach, as going from examples from our own current society between the different races here in the United States. I tried to put that into my story as a way to show that it's no matter like in this world, this is the reality that some people might not even try to deny it to themselves. That like, oh, like sometimes we're all the same, but we're not at the end of the day. some of the little differences is what makes us unique. And in this world with so many races mixing together, I think a previous set beliefs, uh, really, and also a clash of cultures where people might be more mistrusting of some others, especially humans in this world. There's not just one race of humans, there's multiple as well. And that also brings in a lot more attention as well.
Did you have thoughts?
Well, what is the question asking?
Oh, so this was, I guess more generally thinking about how race appears in fantasy and genre fiction. Is that something you've conscientiously had to think about and work through?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like in my work I do talk about institutional racism in a way. I feel like because I mentioned earlier that there are glimpses of the past and the future, because the protagonist is originally from a time set in the future. And so in that time, what is happening, there is like human experimentation happening, but specifically on those who they feel were not meant to survive. And that would be marginalized people, people who don't have any opportunities, anything, because and so they're used as human experiments because their thought process is, oh, well, they were never meant to survive anyways. They were never given resources anyways. So it doesn't matter if we use them for our resources. And so I think a lot about how race can sort of influence the storyline and can make people sort of relate that to the reality that we're living in now.
Oh, you have a Q&A?
Yeah.
Or a question from the Zoom?
Yeah, I have a quick follow-up question for Jonathan specifically that I think really ties into the conversation of race that you were having. So Ethos asks, was the name Sophia Durtrace intentional, and is it pronounced Sophia Durtrace or Sophia Dirt Race? How did you come up with the name, and does it have any significant tie to her story arc?
Sophia Dirt Trace. It's pronounced Dirt Trace, not Dirt Trace. I never thought about it. But her name specifically, actually, her story arc is that she is an adopted noble. She doesn't have the in her eyes of let's say Knox, another noble, doesn't see her as an equal, even though they're both in the nobility. It's because she was adopted. Her last name is adopted. She doesn't have the blood. So her story arc, I want to be able to show that Sophia can overcome this self-doubt as well as overcoming Zaya herself, who sees her as less and really the typical selfish noble thing.
So you're in some ways building upon like character archetypes or tropes as well in your writing.
In my writing, I really want to focus more on character arcs,
Yeah.
because I feel like character arcs is what shows character growth, and that's what I want to do, because character arcs can inspire people throughout anything. For an example, I really like reading a lot of manga, and then there's a lot of character arcs and a lot of character growth, and being able to see how a character goes from the beginning to the end of the story and how they change and stuff, it can resonate with anybody, because in real life we go through changes all the time. We learn things. We can go through a negative arc, a positive arc, or even a neutral arc. But I find that that's the way to inspire people, and that's what I want to be able to do.
I saw that you did like a finger gun, Emily, when Jonathan mentioned manga. Did you have?
Yeah, I would say like I love character-driven stories. I personally read Chainsaw Man like so far, and I feel like that's the sort of character-driven story. I feel like when it's like plot heavy, and it focuses less on the characters, I feel like I'm less attached to it. So that's why seeing characters like go through something and then you just see like every single thing that they're feeling, it makes me feel like, oh, like I can identify with this character.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like character arcs a lot and exploring certain character arcs. Like for me, because the past and the future, I have like characters that determine the answers to like questions such as, oh, are we heading towards a dystopian future? And then they decide what they're gonna do with like the power to go back in time, go into the future, and then seeing like the consequences that come from that and like moral complexities. I think that's so cool. That's like what I mentioned earlier when I was reading Chainsaw Man. I feel like they do a lot of that, and I get like invested because you don't know what other people will decide because you have your own morals and then there are other people with like very different morals from yours. So you can't predict what's gonna happen. Because most of the time, with heroes, they'll be like, oh, I'm gonna always choose the good choice. But then with complex characters, with like complex morality, they're like, oh, well, sometimes I'll choose bad choices and sometimes I'll choose good choices.
Yeah, that's what I want to focus on. The characters that aren't so black and white, where there's always a moral gray area, because in reality, we're not gonna be always. We could say we're always good people or bad people. We can split people into different groups, good and bad. But at the end of the day, we're all able to change for the worse or for the better. So that's what I want to show.
I'm curious, are either of you inspired either by like Dungeons and Dragons formats or by video games? Because I know certain role-playing games have that sort of like chaotic, you know, neutral, I'm totally flubbing the actual terminology.
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
For me, an example would be for Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
It's it's new and it's what it is a Dungeons and Dragons inspired. I wasn't entirely inspired by that, but I kind of got the ideas and the motivation to start doing writing more from that after playing it for a bit. Because the writing in that game is very complex, and that's for a video game. And for me, I wanted to be able to make my own story just from writing itself. And I've been really inspired by a lot of manga and by a lot of comic books and my favorite book of all time is Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien, the way he explored the fantasy and created anything Spanish fantasy nowadays was inspired by him. He created orcs, he created goblins, and he made elves really popular. And I want to be able to expand more on those things with creating new ideas.
Yeah, for me, I think I have two games. I have BioShock Infinite and Detroit Become Human. That's like I think it's like you choose what paths like the characters take, and I thought that was interesting. My work isn't like a choose like your adventure sort of thing, but I feel like exploring characters through their choices is really fun to do, and I feel like the way that the game kind of explored that. We either get like one of the characters' name is Connor, and he can either turn into like a machine where that's his only purpose, or he can choose to be a deviant, which means that oh, I'm not just a machine, I'm human just like everyone else. And through the choices you make, you can choose how they identify. And I thought that was really cool. So I wanted to explore that in my work. I've also heard of Baldur's Gate. I know some people have been recommending that to me, and I thought that your work gave like Dungeons and Dragons energy, so I wanted to ask that as well.
Yeah, I am not technically a gamer, but I would love to be a gamer, and I am often surrounded by people who game. So I am very interested in like the sort of the learning potential of video games, how playing games can sort of instruct you in a lot of different social intricacies and teach you about how to read relationships and to understand how people's identities evolve over time. I think sometimes the social elements of gaming can be overlooked. Yeah, so I guess somewhat relatedly, I'm curious about what writing speculative fiction has taught you. If the process of writing stories has caused you to experience character growth, Jonathan and oh my goodness, Emily and Emily.
For me, I started writing when I was sick with COVID. And for my first time, I remember I was stuck in my room and I was watching Black Clover at the time, and then I started reading Black Clover, which is a fantasy manga created by Hiki Ugatara, I believe is his name. And his fantasy elements really greatly inspired me to start writing because Castonia, what I have now is way different from what I had back then 2 years ago. And I was just writing for fun. And that next semester, I decided to add creative writing as my minor, and I finally took my first creative writing class. And the professor I had at Cal State Fullerton, she was so amazing at it because sometimes I would show her what I was writing, and she would give me so many pointers and so many tips. And just being able to in that class, like, be able to talk to so many people who are writing their own stories or writing something similar or something very different, I was able to learn more from that and be able to improve my writing from there. And now I really want to take this somewhere very special because I feel like I have something that I can use to inspire other people, as I've been inspired by so much writing myself. Specifically, mostly manga has been inspirational. I mean, I would want to draw, but I'm not the best drawer, so like, I just like writing. But if I had the chance, I would.
But did you draw the map?
Oh, the map, yes, but that took forever.
I think that still counts.
Sure.
I'll count. Yeah.
For me, I started writing stories in third grade. And I think seventh grade was actually when I started writing, like, specifically science fiction, I would say, fantasy and science fiction. And I remember it was when I read a book from by Ray Bradbury called There Will Come South Rains. And I remember reading that, and I thought that it was so cool how, like, the themes explored and how it was just like a metaphor for, I think, like a nuclear war sort of thing. And I feel like since I write like dystopian fiction now, I feel like like just experimenting with it. I think speculative fiction has a lot of like what if questions that you can explore, and you can just like expand upon that. And so like you, like for instance, like you like to read like manga and stuff like that, and you wanted to write something like that. For me, it's similar. I remember when I read There Will Come Soft Rains, I was like, I wanna write something like that too. Just like at the end, I just like, whoa, what did I just read? Like I want to write something like that. So I think speculative fiction novels tend to do that a lot. Just like reflecting over your entire life after you read them.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you keep using the term "what if,"
Yeah.
because I think I sometimes think of writing as like a simulation process, um, where you're testing out these different scenarios in a dynamic way. All right, just to check, Kate, were you queuing that someone had a question?
Yeah, I think it follows well here. There's a couple questions, but I think some of them we can maybe circle back to in the Q&A. But one right now is from SOs for both of the writers speaking. What has been the hardest aspect of developing or producing your story? And do you have any plans for getting out of that kind of pit, or are you looking for help?
For me, the hardest part has been just finding time for this, as I've been busy with my biotechnology degree, and this is something that I never realized I had a passion for wanting to create stories until I got sick with COVID and I was just stuck in my room and just being inspired by so many things over my life. I started realizing that I want to be able to do that, bring that inspiration to other people. But I would say that the biggest thing is obviously finding time for this.
For me, I think the hardest part is sort of being satisfied with what you're writing, because for me, what I do is I edit as I write, which is a nightmare for writers because you'll have like 500 words, you'll have like 5,000 words, and then you'll think, oh no, this wouldn't sound good to an audience. And then you erase like 1,000 words. And then in the end, you're only left with like 550 words. And you just think, oh, I didn't get that much. In reality, most of the advice that I've got is just write. Like, just write and don't think of your audience when you're writing. Just make sure you're having fun when you write, and you don't have to think, oh, somebody's going to criticize me. I think, like I said earlier, speculative fiction, you can just experiment, just have fun with it. Just do writing exercises and then just write what you want.
One thing I want to add is that I watch a lot of YouTube videos about writing within different genres, the manga, comics, script writing for movies, and a lot of things like that. And one thing I realized that we here in the Western world, most stories, whenever they have flaws, they don't try to fix them or they don't. Sometimes it messes up the story. I realized that in Eastern, and mostly in Japanese manga, all these authors, whenever they're writing their stories, they embrace their flaws that are in them. And that's something I want to be able to bring to the Western world because I feel like by embracing those flaws that are in your story, you can create a stronger narrative.
You have another question?
Yes, Michael is asking a question that very directly relates to that and wants to know, from Jonathan, what manga have inspired you?
So much manga. I would say my biggest inspiration for what started is, of course, with Black Clover, as it's the most similar to what I consider to be basic fantasy. But some other ones would be, of course, One Piece, Jujutsu Kaisen, Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho. I would say Demon Slayer is a slightly inspirational. My Hero, of course. And honestly, there's so many others that I just can't think of right now. But manga has been a very big inspiration for me.
For me, I think there's only one manga that has inspired me, and it was Neon Genesis Evangelion. I feel like the whole mech genre, I guess, they have going on, like the themes, and they do a lot with like internalization and the characterization. Another character-driven story, but I feel like within those stories, all of the characters are so complex, and I would argue that all of them are not exactly the best of people. But that's what I like about it. I like that I don't like the characters.
I definitely had a follow-up question that I have forgotten. I think it was probably related to something you said earlier. And so I did want to return to the topic of time management that I think Jonathan brought up, and then maybe I'll cue you all to share the more of your work that you wanted to read to people after this for time's sake. But I had a writer friend who I think advised that there will never really be time, especially as you grow older and you have more responsibilities to write. There will never be a time that writing feels like the only responsibility you have, and that sometimes you have to shirk other responsibilities in order to do it, or take risks. And maybe in some ways put off sleep in order to write. But it's still possible to achieve. Yeah, you had a question?
Someone in the chat has asked, is there a ritual, for both of you that helps you get into that space of writing?
Well, for me, I have very specific circumstances. I need rain sounds in the background. I need jazz in the background. I need to be in my room, like hunched over my desk like that. It needs to be like 5 p.m. at least. And I feel like also with the time management thing, I've also had like a hard time sort of finding the time to focus on what I want to do, to write. So I just focus on smaller things. I think just fitting in a few words each day is what will like eventually build up. You don't have to feel like you have to write a whole novel like over a month or something. Because for me, I've been focusing on poems lately. Even though I'll look at my novel in progress and think, oh, I'm not making any progress. I'm still writing. Like at the end of the day, as long as you're still writing, that's all that really matters in your progress. You shouldn't think like, oh, I haven't written like 2 whole novels yet, or I haven't written a whole series. Like it's okay. You'll get there.
For me, there isn't really a ritual. It's just that for time being, when I started writing a lot, it was mostly at night because I was just up. And for me, it was just like for me at the time, I felt like okay, I did my best for writing at night. But ever since this few months, there hasn't been really anything that I need to really write. It's that if I just, as long as I keep writing at least a little bit each day, like like Emily was saying,
Yeah.
I'll eventually get to where I want to be, and then hopefully eventually where somewhere where I'll be able to eventually get this out to everyone around the world.
Yeah, so can we have maybe a short round of applause before the writers share some more if there would? I am impressed by how knowledgeable and poised you all are. You have done great. Thank you so much. I know you both have like a few minutes of either your writing or more information that you wanted to share about your writing that you'd like to present. Yes. Is there a certain order you'd like to go in, or someone who'd like to go first?
Okay, for me, I have the excerpt. You have like a written excerpt?
I don't have an excerpt, but I do have basically the rundown of where my story takes on from now, from where it actually starts. I don't have an excerpt ready for that because I feel like
You're not ready to
ready for that.
publicize it?
You know, yeah.
That's
think-
very fair.
Maybe since I might take longer reading mine, so you can go first.
Okay, so for me, as you all know from the background of the story, it takes place around 50 years before. So it's been 50 years since then, and Jason Harlight himself, he unfortunately, there was a celestial stone ceremony, and these stones are, as previously said, are semi-conscious, and they choose a worthy individual. And there's a ceremony for this that happens when people who are descendant from families who are already have these powers or are suspected to have them, they come to the ceremony when they're around 13 years old, as that's in Gastonia, that's considered like a rite of passage. Jason himself, he is the twin, him and his twin sister are both chosen for this day, and they go with their family. And everyone has everyone has big expectations on him. And him and his sister, as they're considered like celebrities since their family was veterans in the war, and they were the ones that helped end it. Unfortunately, Jason is not chosen by any stone, and his sister is though. Jason feels very let down. He feels like he let everybody down. His family, they're not the type to like outcast him or isolate him. They still love him very much. However, he feels that he's an imposter in them now. And the focus of I want this world to become like a series of books. But for this first book, I want to focus on Jason's ability to overcome his self-doubt and be able to stand up for himself. As another quirk of his is that when it comes to defending others, he's very selfless. But when it comes to defending himself, I've been there where it's really hard to defend yourself and you can't stand up for yourself and you let people walk over you. And I want to be able to show that this first book is him finding a way to basically overcome that problem and be able to stand up for himself finally. And then the protagonist of my story, Ada herself, she is on an entirely different mission. The reason that she's even in Gastonia is as a spy, but she's only 14 years old. But she was forced to by her family and more importantly she meets Jason, and they both really don't get along in the beginning as they're very different. Ada is very quiet, but she's not very selfless. She's very selfish herself. She's able to stand up for herself, but sometimes there's some things that you can't do by yourself. Jason understands this as he's been in that position. And I want this story to focus on how this dynamic, they're able to inspire each other. With Ada showing how being able to stand up for yourself is something you should be able to do. But also kind of like a balance. Like there are times when you must be able to stand up for yourself. Also, it's times where you should let other people help you, especially people that you care for or you love. And I want the story to be able to end with both of them being able to see each other in a new light, but also see that they both grown and changed and gained their own strengths. Yeah, that's what focused on my first book.
Thank you. So you are imagining this as a series?
Yes, I've gone way, way deep before about where I would want to take this story.
Yeah, very neat. Very cool, yeah.
Thank you.
And Emily wanted to.
Okay, so before I read this, I suggest that the people who are listening online turn on captions because this is, I wouldn't say it's a lot, but it's a mouthful. So, all right. Chapter 1, An Experiment for Mankind. Whatever you do, do not turn my daughter into one of those dirty machines, shouted Gaines through his rounded glass capsule, his breath coming out in small, frantic puffs. His pleas were stifled by the dissonant murmur of researchers reverberating throughout the boundless lab, and his fists were long since bloody from banging endlessly against his capsule's glass wall. No matter how much he hollered at the speaker above his head, not a single researcher cared to respond. There were no more than coded figures turning a blind eye to his pleas. A single night had passed since Gaines was captured, and he was becoming no less frail than a soon-to-be corpse. Peering through the reflection of his capsule, he was nothing but a clump of dark, messy curls, an unkempt beard, and a couple of wrinkles around and under his brown eyes, which appeared almost black with a glint of madness. If Gaines were to die at that moment, decaying from the lack of air, food, or water, then by that point his dried up and discolored corpse would be tossed in yesterday's trash, like sweeping bug carcasses into the dustpan. He was no stranger to this mockery. To these scientists, the year 2047 would forever go down in history as the year that technology changed the world. Gaines knew enough about the monsters in his laboratory to know that they only saw him as a swarming pest, a measly human who deserved to be strung up against the wall like a taxidermied animal. He figured, based on the purposeful slamming from the other side of his tall glass capsule, he had a better chance of death than his own freedom. For he was left to fend for his own, to save his captured daughter, with only himself at death's door, among the surrounding, body-filled cages that laughed at him in his misery. How cruel of these monsters, Gaines fumed, to leave his fate to miracles while only giving him a built-in speaker to speak his mind, which he couldn't even turn on and off at his own will. Any sound that Gaines would make, whether that be a gasp or a scream, was muted by those who listened, if at all. The white, tentacular tubes that were attached to the top of each capsule, including his own, remained attached from his limbs and sustained his body's functions, though that bit of knowledge did little to soothe his fear. Then, without a warning, a scream broke through his thoughts. A familiar scream, girlish in nature, one that sounded like his daughter, his poor, sweet Nina, that was soon followed by a tumultuous crash. "Celia!" Gaines called to no one, wobbling anxiously in a cell. Just as Gaines opened his mouth to shout again, another scream breached his ears, leading his breast to spiral into a quick and frantic heaving. His desperate strikes to the cylindrical walls grew stronger in a last attempt to break free, but to no avail. The image of his daughter struck through Gaines's mind as if he were desperately latching on to what remained of her, even when they were apart. He retained the memory of her skin, a sun-kissed tan full of life and spirit. He retained the memory of her curls, so rich and tawny. And he retained the memory of her golden brown eyes, which Gaines feared he would never see again. The image of his daughter struck through Gaines's mind, clear as day. Yet when the metal doors leading inside the laboratory were forced open, his eyes landed on that young little girl of his that could only be mistaken for a prisoner. It anguished him how dehumanized they made her. His daughter was on the brink of collapse, teetering between tears and terror as she lay on a panic-stricken sod, unable to speak, sounding too muddled for Gaines to hear. Her head wobbled from side to side, with the restraints around her wrist and the guards seizing her arms, rendering her helpless. The moment Gaines met his daughter's gaze, his daughter tried calling out for him, as if to warn him of something. "Papa," Celia mouthed, her lips quivering with extreme dread. "Papa!" Gaines heard the whir of machinery from behind him before the two tubes of his capsule shot in through his back, piercing through bone. He went limp, flaccid, and then he was dead. Thank you.
So, we now have, I think, a few minutes more for Q&A. So if people have other questions that they wanted to pose that they haven't posed, feel free to do that either through Zoom or in person. And of course, you're welcome to comment now upon the fiction, or the further details about their fiction that both writers have now shared. We have some questions on Zoom.
Yeah. So one question that's more geared towards Emily, and then another question geared to Jonathan, both from Michael. So let me, I guess, ask Emily's question and then, I'll ask Jonathan. So, when going back in time, how, do you address characters taking advantage of their knowledge of the past to have rapport, when time traveling, and how did BioShock Infinite influence your writing?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first. So BioShock Infinite, I would say has, let's see, I think it also has to do with some technology. There is this whole theme where they are worshiping this guy. I think his name is something Cornstalk or something, but basically it's sort of in a way like a religion. Like they treat him as a religious figure, and that's similar to Romeo, who is the villain in my story. And so what happens is that they treat him like some saint, but really he's not. He is not a saint whatsoever. In fact, he goes all the way to the past. I think that could probably be with the first question, but he weaves into the past, and Celia basically makes a deal with the villain to go back into the past. So she's stuck in there. She can't travel like forward back to forward world or anything. She's just stuck there. And so what happens is that the villain makes it so that it's his perfect reality, and everyone in this like alternate past like worships him, and not Celia, of course, but he says, oh, I know everything, like because he has now the future from all points in time. And so what happens is that he tells all the people who are naive and don't know any better that, oh, I know everything. And so they follow his rule, even though really his rule is not good. He's like a dictator. But I hope that answered Michael's question.
Yes.
Yeah, I hope that answered Michael's question.
Awesome. And then Michael's question for Jonathan is, how have you addressed limiting magic in your world so that you don't have like a Deus Ex Machina? Star Wars and Avatar: The Last Airbender approach this by making it a martial art that has to be learned and explored through talent developed over time and repeated practice of the art that's often off screen. Yeah, so I think like, do you have something similar to that, or how does that sort of magic, like what is the sort of structure of magic in your world?
So that is actually an issue. I know that sometimes there's some stories that they do have, and I wanted to make sure that mine is complex, but to the point where it doesn't contradict in the future. And that's why I managed to create three separate, all these magics in my world, they're all connected to one another. It's just that they each require a different aspect. For Equinox, of course, it's basically spiritual energy. So I based it more off like Ki, which is from Dragon Ball. Like this is all required based off your physical abilities and your mental ability, but also your spiritual abilities. Equinox is something that is not easily learned, and it's something that you need to be very trained in, and you need to be very dedicated and have a lot of time for this. Runes, on the other hand, these are something that can be learned by anybody. However, if you do not do the runes in the correct order or do the correct symbols, you could kill yourself in this world, or worse. So that's why I'm limiting that. Celestial stones, on the other hand, these are only a few selected people within the entire world are worthy of these stones to be selected for these. And that's what makes people who have these abilities so coveted and also so feared, but also very respected. And for them, their abilities are also limited based off whatever they were gifted with. I hope that answers this question.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you have, I'm curious, either of you spreadsheets when you're planning out your stories?
I have an outline up, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have an outline too. I think I'm more of like a plotter than a pantser.
Yeah.
So I have like several writing apps. I don't know where some of my information is located sometimes. It's like, imagine a disorganized person with a bunch of files and scattered everywhere. Yeah. So if one day I'm writing my novel and I need information, I won't know where to look. I'll just have to like go through all the disorganized files.
Did you have any other questions on Zoom? Okay.
Yeah, one more question is, who is your favorite, this is from Ethos, who is your favorite character that you've written? If you want to tell us a little about them, are they a main or minor character?
You want me to?
You-
Okay. So I did not mention him at all, but there is this one character that I have, named Alicio, and he's like the love interest of Celia, but he's also a character on his own. And I would say that he's the total opposite of Celia. Celia is like this human experiment, has to go through war, but then Alicio, he hasn't gone through that. He's living in his own little bubble. He's a prodigy. He has a loving family, but I think exploring his character has been really fun because his character is supposed to represent privilege in a way. And I want that to contrast with Celia as a character. And I enjoy writing his character arc. Like you mentioned, you really like character arcs. And for me, I want my story to be character driven. So with Alicio, he basically has to have a wake up call that, oh, I'm privileged. Like I'm living a privileged life. While Celia, she hasn't had any opportunities and now she's thrown into this like alternate past where everything is perfect for everybody and everything is romanticized, but she doesn't know if she can have that because she's never had that. While Alicia, on the other hand, he's had like everything. And so exposing himself to Celia's world, like I think the contrast between that has made him my favorite character to write.
For me, it would be the protagonist of my story, Ada Pixina, because well, going more in depth about her character, the reason she was sent to Castonia was because due to this ancient prophecy that was found during the war. It was written in a very old language in this world, and this prophecy foretells that someone one day will be given this power by a celestial stone that falls from the heavens, and it will be able, and whoever gains this will. The prophecy is very unclear on whether they will either save the world, destroy the world, or whatever. And Ada she's sent into the infiltrate Measuring Conservatory as this is the main hub of all the knowledge and like basically like a huge library for all this stuff. She's sent by the people as a transfer student, but she really isn't. She's a spy. She's going in there to see if she can gain any knowledge that's beneficial for the Zelvin people. She meets Jason, who is very selfless, and he, of course, trusts as the relationship grows. They learn to trust each other, and eventually, it's discovered that he eventually discovers himself that he might be this chosen one. In the prophecy, it says certain aspects of the chosen one, and he represents these. Towards the end of my first book, I really wanted to be that Jason discovers that he is his chosen one. But now that Ada has grown to know him as a person, she has to decide whether she will be able, will she stay loyal to her people or will she stay loyal to her new friend? And I feel like that character arc will be very, very interesting.
So I recognize that we are a bit over time. Was there anyone in person or any other questions on Zoom? No other questions on Zoom? Was there anyone in person who had a question?
I have a
Yes.
question for Emily about the Celia.
So Celia,
Celia.
yeah,
About her identity. You said she's Afro Latina.
yes.
So within your story, do you like explore like does your character lean more towards one identity or
I would say that she doesn't lean towards like one identity over the other. Honestly, I have yet to explore more of her Afro-Latina heritage, I would say. I feel like it is explored a little bit towards her family, but I think I try to explore more on the fact that in her world she's a marginalized person and that she wasn't given access to certain things. I do want to explore more of like the narrative behind what you're asking about. So I will keep that in mind.
Any last question? I think maybe we could do one more question from people in person. Okay, we have a question from Jen.
So, been watching a lot of masterclass lately. Cause why not? And I was watching Amy Tan's masterclass, and she says that when she writes, she has writing muses, and she has like multiple types. Do you have anyone who anything fictional or non-fictional that's like your writing muse?
My muse, I think, well, there is one author that I would say that my writing style is like heavily influenced by, and it's V.E. Schwab. And I think she's written books like Vicious and A Darker Shade of Magic. And that is what really introduced me to like fantasy and stuff like that. So I would say that in a way, she is my muse, and that she influenced my writing style a lot. And yeah, character-driven stories, going back to that. I feel like her stories are also very character-driven, and they deal with like immoral characters too. So that's what I'm trying to explore.
For me, Western authors, I would say the most influential to me is Tolkien himself. The way he describes the world that he has created in the Middle Earth, I feel like that's the best way I could describe it, how I describe my world, the way he elaborates on the grass, the mountains, the trees. That's how I see myself, in Western world. Eastern, mostly Japanese manga, I would say the most influential writer that's I would consider my muse would be Oda. He creates One Piece. He has managed to create a long lasting story that's been going since 1999. It's still going. And looking over and being a fan, I've seen how he developed his characters and how each new arc brings a new challenge to every single character. And each character reacts in a different way based off who they are, and it's changed them. I feel like that's what's really inspired me to be very character driven.
So unfortunately, I think that is our time for today. I would have loved to continue talking. You all are very engaging speakers. Do you have any like social media shout outs you want to do?
I do have an Instagram. It's Stellar Skies. I know it's a very interesting username, but it's spelled like stellar and then skies with 2 S's.
I don't have a media outlet yet for this thing. However, I do want to be able to expose more of my work, maybe perhaps through social media, but I'm not entirely sure until I get more work done.
Oh yeah, very understandable. Okay. So thank you, Jonathan and Emily, for your work, for your presentations today. I'd like to give you all another round of applause. And I do have some closing remarks I'd like to share, since this is our last event for the Eaton Symposium this year. Okay, so thank you all for both on Zoom and in person staying here till the end, and for being here at any point in the day. This is, I believe, the first Eaton Symposium that we've had at UCR, though of course there's a longer legacy of the Eaton Conference happening at UC Riverside, which will be continuing in the future and hopefully coming back in 2025. So those of you who did sign up and provide your email on the sign-in sheet should be receiving updates about any future Eaton related events. Yeah, so I want to also thank, I guess on behalf of my co-organizers and myself, everyone who presented today as well. And I'd like to give all of the presenters another round of applause. Yeah, your work, I think, has moved us all and has exposed us to new ideas, new concepts, and viewed us with a new energy to take to our own work, whatever that work may be, whether it's writing fiction or writing nonfiction and scholarship. I also want to encourage people, and thank you, Chelsea, for actually reminding me about this, to go to the powwow that's happening at UC Riverside this weekend. If you have time, I think the powwow is happening at like lot 6?
26.
Lot 26. Which is like up the road from here, and you can also see it on the UCR mobile map if that interests you. Any last words from my co-organizers or anything I've left out before we let people go? No?
If you haven't signed in, please sign in.
Also, we have so many trading cards.
Yeah.
Please take some.
Yeah. Oh, and for people who are on Zoom, if you have filled out the sign-in sheet, the virtual sign-in sheet, and you've opted in your mailing address, we will send you one of the trading cards. Okay. So without further ado, thank you all for being here today again. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to doing more events in this vein again.